Hey everyone, welcome back to the Her Resources podcast, the show where we explore the evolving world of human resources, leadership, and the issues shaping the workplace today through conversations that elevate voices and bring practical insight to leaders everywhere. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a topic that has sparked a lot of conversation, debate, and reflection across organizations, which is fairness in the workplace. For years, many organizations have invested heavily in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives with the best of intentions. But despite those efforts, many leaders are asking an important question: why aren't we seeing the results we hoped for? Today's guest believes the answer lies in rethinking how we approach fairness altogether. Lily Zheng is a DEI strategist, consultant, and the author of the book Fixing Fairness: Your Tenets to Transform Diversity Backlash into Progress for All. Lily works with organizations to move beyond performative efforts toward real systemic change, helping leaders redesign workplace systems so fairness becomes part of how organizations actually operate. In this conversation, we're going to talk about why good intentions alone aren't enough and how organizations can move past polarization and backlash, and what leaders, especially HR leaders, can do to build workplaces that are fair, transparent, and accountable. This is an honest and thoughtful conversation about what it really takes to make progress. So let's get started. Welcome to the new chapter of the Her Resources podcast. I'm your host, Linda Misegatis, and I'm so excited to be stepping into this next season with you solo. This podcast has always been about amplifying women's voices, exploring the challenges we face in HR, leadership, and life, and sharing the tools and inspiration we need to thrive. And now, I'm taking that mission even deeper. You'll hear real conversations with bold and authentic women, as well as reflections from me on everything from pay equity and burnout to confidence, leadership, and the messy, beautiful journey of growth. This is more than just a podcast, it's a community, a space for us to learn, lead, and lift each other up. Welcome to this new beginning. This is the Her Resources podcast. Let's get started. Welcome to the studio, Lily.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to diving into some of these tough topics and hopefully leaving the folks tuning in feeling a little more confident and a little more equipped to tackle these topics in their own workplaces.
Absolutely. Well, what I'd love to do is kind of get started a little bit with, before we dive into the ideas behind your book, I'd really love to start with your journey. So what led you into work to helping organizations rethink fairness and inclusion?
Yeah, well, this is a story that starts back in my time as a college student, when, like many people, I was very interested in what I could do with my life, what I could do with my career, particularly to help people, right? Like many people, especially this will resonate to lots of people in human resources, right? We
Yeah.
we want to help. We want to create workplaces that are better for all people,
Hmm.
and yet I was finding that I didn't quite know how to do that. And so as a student, I was participating quite a lot in student activism. So I was protesting, I was attending rallies, I was making little cardboard signs, right, to
Yeah.
hold up at protests and all that. And I think, like many folks who were involved in those kinds of movements, I had a very clear vision for how I wanted the world to look, and a very clear sense that the injustices and the unfairness around us was unacceptable, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so I said, look, this is all broken. We need to burn it down. We need to change these systems. And throughout that process, I came into contact with university staff, with administrators, with workplace leaders, and all of whom said, well, you know, these are how these big systems work. Let's start
Mm,
trying to change them. And as a young student, I didn't understand these kinds of systems. I
yeah.
didn't understand these kinds of processes. So I spent, in hindsight, many long years um, basically throwing myself against a brick wall, right? Not noticing that there was a
Right.
door to the left of me. So
Right.
I eventually took that experience and that passion and said, okay, the passion, the vision, these were not
Mhm.
incorrect. In fact, these were really valuable, but they didn't have the knowledge behind them to temper this energy into real change. So I started studying the sociology of organizations. I started studying how it is we actually change workplaces for the better. And that took me
Okay.
down the road that I'm on today, of being a workplace strategist, of being a consultant, working with leaders to apply evidence based practices that we have from hundreds of years of research so that we don't just say all the nice words, we don't just commit with all the flowery language, but we actually do the hard work of rolling our sleeves up and changing our workplaces for the better, as messy and as complicated as that looks like. And for many years, that involved me working in the DEI space, right?
Okay.
Um, but it was always as a strategist. It was always as someone who's saying, like, look, I care about people just like you. And the way that we create
Mhm.
workplaces that are more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive is to create better systems, fairer
Mhm.
processes, right? More
Yes.
transparent cultures. These are all the things that we're working towards. And so that's the work that I'm going to do.
I love that story, and I love how you got there because I think that that is the challenge that we all often face sometimes is looking at this. When you described you throwing yourself against the wall and realizing that there was a door next to you, and I think that it is really hard to figure out how do you take on all of these challenges because it is something that is so systemic. It has been around for such a long time and, it's evolved over the years, but certainly not at the pace we would expect it to have evolved even today. I mean, I'm always still shocked when I read the statistics behind all of these, stories and what's happening and just where we started and where we are. Man, we have not made as much progress as one would expect us to.
No.
So when you first began working in the DEI world, what were you seeing inside organizations that really made you realize, like, something wasn't working?
Well, this man, I have so many stories from this
I'll
time.
bet you
So,
do, I'll bet, yes.
before I actually went into consulting, I was doing this work within a university. So
Okay.
we would do trainings, we would do learning experiences, and
Mhm,
even then, right? So imagine me, I'm 21, 22 maybe, right?
mhm,
And my job is to design and assess the results of survey feedback. And so, we send people these surveys. We ask people how the workshop or the session was, the training. And I was just starting to see pretty much in my like second month working in that role that the questions we were asking didn't really matter. They were vanity metrics. We were saying
mm.
like, well, how much
Okay,
did you
yeah,
like it? Right? How would you rate your enjoyment of the session from 1 to 5? And I was just scratching my head thinking, I don't care if they enjoyed the session. What I
right,
care is
yeah.
about, are they less racist afterwards, right?
Right, right,
Like are they still
yes, yeah,
discriminating against people? Are
right,
the workplace
exactly.
cultures that they're in becoming more healthy? We weren't asking
Yeah,
these questions. And when I asked if we could ask these questions, the
mhm,
response was, well, it's a little too complicated, right? Like, we're
mhm,
just here to deliver the training, and we have to hope with our best intentions that this reaches people's hearts and minds and gives them that aha moment. And myself, from a quantitative background, I was like, "No, that's not gonna cut it, right?"
right,
Like, unless
yeah.
we measure it, we're not going to see, change. Um,
So true,
and eventually
absolutely.
when I left and I started my own consulting business and
Mhm,
went into workplaces, I saw the exact same thing over and over and over
brilliant,
again. There was a
mhm,
lot of talk, a lot of lofty commitment. And not only was there much less action, but the action that did happen wasn't structured in such a way that workplaces could even know if they were succeeding. And so they were sinking, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars on initiatives that made them feel good, but that couldn't deliver any real impact. Or if it did deliver impact,
mhm,
they have no way of knowing. So, like,
Right.
these things really made me pause and think, if this is the way we've always done it,
Mhm.
maybe we need to be doing something different.
Yeah, I like that. Well, it's that whole thing of, first of all, my husband always says, the road to good intentions or the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
That's true.
So, exactly what you were saying there. And then, secondarily to that, it's that whole adage of, you keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. It's the
Yes.
definition of insanity, right?
Yes.
And yet, we do find ourselves, because I can say with the utmost certainty that in all the years I've been in the work world, we have not changed those surveys one bit. Most
No.
organizations are still asking, and I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like it's because we're not comfortable with being uncomfortable. We're not willing to ask the hard questions. And I think that maybe there was a time when that made sense in the workforce because we kind of created this separation and the bubbles that we had around, like,
Mhm.
here's the real world and here's our work world. But I think COVID blended all of that together, right? So now everything is all part of the same world. We don't get to pretend like they're separate anymore. And we're not comfortable with being uncomfortable with these conversations.
I think that's part of it, right? It's something that I call fear of finding out, FOFO, right?
Mhm.
So
Yes.
they're very happy to do the training because the training makes them feel good. But
Yeah.
uh, it's much more uncomfortable to ask, well, did it work? Because if the answer is no, then they're forced to confront, well, then why are we doing the training? Is it just optics? Is it just performative? Is it something we're doing just, to show that we care without actually taking responsibility for ending discrimination or actually, creating fairness? And those are uncomfortable conversations.
They
I think
are.
another part of it is that a lot of organizations that pursue this work, they either underestimate the challenge of
Mhm.
following through, or if we're being a little more cynical, they have no intention of following through from the
Oh,
start,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
when we look at the work required to create a more inclusive, more fair workplace, right? Like it's serious. Like it takes some
It is.
investment. Um,
Yeah.
and at least under previous administrations, right, there has
Mhm.
been many incentives, at the very least, to comply with the bare minimum of anti-discrimination law,
Right.
because we know that
Mhm.
without this bare minimum compliance, workplaces just aren't going to go through that effort. Now the regulatory landscape has changed, and we see the EEOC signaling very different intentions when it comes to compliance, and that absence of regulatory pressure is in some way, I think, changing how leaders are thinking about this work. Now they're not thinking of it as a need to have. They're saying like, "Oh,
Yes.
not to say they'd ever say this out loud, but maybe there's not as much pressure to make sure that we're not discriminating
Right.
against people. Maybe there's not as much pressure to make sure that our websites are accessible, that our workplace
Mhm.
culture isn't toxic, that we're not bullying or harassing people. I mean, like, maybe it happens here and there, but like, what are people going to do? Submit a complaint to the EEOC that's never going to get followed up on? I'm sure we can just
Right.
leave that for tomorrow, right? I think
Yeah.
some leaders are thinking that. And it's
I think you're
changing
right.
the sort of everyday math that they go into the workplace with, honestly, with some very expensive consequences for their workforce.
I have exciting news. The Her Resources podcast is opening sponsorships. If your brand supports women in HR and leadership, think talent, well being, learning, pay equity, coaching, productivity, or mission driven tech. This is your moment. Our listeners are decision makers and change makers who show up for real conversations and practical tools every week. We offer flexible options, pre roll or mid roll host reads, series sponsorships, and thought leadership integrations that highlight your story without the fluff. Ready to connect with a highly engaged audience and grow with us? Email contact@herresourcespodcast.com and put sponsorship in the subject line. I can't wait to collaborate. Mhm. That is very true. Well, and I don't know about you, but I think that it was interesting to watch the shift that occurred, when the whole unraveling of DEI began. But what was interesting to me about all of that is that DEI, it became a marketing term, I think, for companies because there was a lot of conversation around organizations that prioritize DEI make more money is really what it was coming down to, right? It was about money because that's how we view things sometimes. And I think what we started to see is that it was a marketing ploy. We saw it in all the advertisements. We saw all of these companies really kind of coming through this. And then to your point, when there was no longer the pressure behind it, we have watched a very quick unraveling in
Uh-huh.
many organizations who, to your point, I think, never really intended to make any changes at all. It was performative. And the ones who were already deeply rooted in creating fair workplaces didn't change anything. They
That's right.
continued to do
And they're still
what they had
doing that
always
work
done,
to
right?
this day,
Yes.
right? So I
Yeah.
think that that pattern is something that we absolutely need to call out, right? Because it isn't
Yeah.
that we had this shining example of DEI
Right.
being created everywhere and a,
Yeah.
golden age of fairness. Like, no,
Right.
like if you look at the stats, the first one that comes to mind is that between 1982 and 2015, the rates of anti-Black hiring discrimination changed by 0%.
Wow.
Zero,
Wow. It's
zero.
just yeah. Yep.
We're in
Yep. It's
1982
crazy.
functionally, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, you can look at this stuff and be like, wait, but since 1982, haven't things gotten so much better? It feels like it because we've been
Yeah.
talking so
Yeah.
much more. And then, well,
Right.
since 2022, haven't things gotten a lot worse? Well, it feels like it. We're talking about it a lot less.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
this undercurrent, this ugly narrative is that
Mhm.
you know things haven't really gotten better or worse. They've stayed bad. And what's changed is that the DEI we put on a pedestal was then turned into a sacrificial lamb, and
Yes.
we got rid of it. Okay. But those of
Yeah.
us who are still doing the work, or if we haven't been doing the work and we want to now, I mean, the underlying work has not changed, right? And that I think is the takeaway for those of us that want to create impact now. Yes, we don't have the same access to the language, to the performative stuff that maybe everyone was doing in 2020. But okay, there are practices that people have been doing since the 60s that meaningfully
Right.
create real impact. And guess what? They're all 100% legal. So let's start doing them, right? There's very little risk associated with them. For example, those resume studies, right? Where they send out
Yes.
two sets of resumes, and one of them has, let's say, a male sounding name, and one of them has a female
Yep.
sounding name, but the qualifications are exactly the same. Or maybe it's a white sounding name versus a black sounding name, or etc. Almost all of these resume studies find that gender discrimination, right, racial discrimination, disability related discrimination are alive and well. Very depressing. But but the most recent versions of these studies also find that there are a couple small factors that can reduce a company's discrimination to almost zero. What are those factors? For example, the centralization of their hiring process. How boring is
Interesting.
that? How boring is that, right? Like,
Right.
companies that
It's
have
very
a
boring. You're right.
standardized, centralized HR process are meaningfully less discriminatory. Like, that should have been, like, the news for the last, like,
Yeah,
10
that just
years.
feels like 101 type of stuff,
101,
right?
right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to do all of these initiatives, these trainings. Centralize your hiring process. Create
Yeah.
hiring panels, create scoring rubrics, train your hiring managers to make sure that you're asking the same questions to all candidates, right? Basics
Right.
101. And this dramatically reduces the rate of hiring discrimination from up to 30% in some industries down to like 2% in other like
Wow.
how nuts is that? Now,
Yeah, that's a staggering stat
and is
that
the
you just
federal
put there.
government going to come after you for standardizing your scoring rubrics? I don't think
Right.
so, right?
No, I
So,
don't
like,
think so either.
we
Yeah.
have so much access. We have so many tools at our fingertips, and yet we spend all of our time debating, training this, using these words or those words, right? And
Yes.
meanwhile, we're sitting on this gold mine. of practices that can
Right.
meaningfully make a difference right now, that are legally not risky in the slightest, that deliver huge
Right.
benefits for all of our populations. We got to start
Mm,
doing them.
we do. I love that call out, and I'm wondering, what was it that motivated you then to write Fixing Fairness? Because was there a moment? Was there an event? Was there something that made you say, "I gotta do this"?
So I started writing the book the day after the election.
Okay. Okay.
I sat down the day before so I sat down the day before and I said, look,
Uh-huh.
you know, if the election goes one way, for better or worse, the status quo will continue. And
Right.
I've written several previous books on this subject.
Right. Yeah.
And my previous books basically say, look, unless we change the way we do DEI work, it's going to fall off a cliff, right?
Mhm.
Like, here
Mhm.
are the practices we need to keep this work alive. After 2024, right, I was like, well, this work is not alive anymore, right?
No.
Like this work will not be alive. I think it's delusional to think that the work will survive in 2025 and
Mhm.
beyond. And I don't like being right, but I think I'm right. So
Yes.
I wrote the book as not how do we protect this work, but a how do we
Okay.
rebuild it better? Because what
Oh, I
what we
like that.
called DEI in
Mhm.
2023 will not survive in this day and age. One, because it's not effective, and two, because now it's being heavily attacked by the political
Right.
right. And so it just doesn't
Yeah.
have any path to survival. It needs to evolve. And that evolution is what every company has been forced to do. I saw an opportunity to push people to evolve this work in ways that are not just defensive, but maybe even
Mhm.
beneficial, proactive, effective towards
Right.
practices that we should have been doing all along.
I really like that. Well, in the book, you challenge some of the traditional ways organizations approach DEI work. And if we look at like the core thesis of the book, we titled the episode today, Why Good Intentions Aren't Enough.
Mm,
What did you mean by that?
yeah. Well, the book Fixing Fairness talks a lot about, well, first of all, there's this concept in the book that I call a Cobra Effect.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I don't call it a Cobra Effect. Scientists call it a Cobra Effect. Um, it basically hails back to this story from India in colonial times when the British government basically said, hey, we have a snake infestation, a cobra infestation in this city.
Mhm.
And what we're going to do is we're going to release a bounty so that anyone who turns in a cobra head gets paid. So I'll
Oh,
incentivize
okay.
you to catch some cobras and kill them and give me their
Okay.
heads, right?
Yeah.
Now, fast forward a couple weeks, a couple months, they're getting a lot of heads, right? Like
Mhm.
every day, people are turning in heads, and the number of cobras is not going down. Why? Because people are breeding cobras. Because if you turn in their heads, you make a lot of money. So people start breeding
Right.
cobras. Now, the British
Yeah.
government got mad. They said, you're gaming the system. We're getting rid of the
Mhm.
bounty. So, what did every cobra farm do? They released their cobras into the city. The cobra population tripled. And
Wow.
that story is a perfect example of the now infamous
That is a
Cobra
perfect example.
effect, where good
Yeah.
intentions that aren't thought through can actually make problems worse. Now we have
Yeah.
now th this example is not just applied to DEI, it's applied to pretty much everything
Oh, sure.
policymakers, right? Like
Yeah.
decision makers do in our day-to-day world. It's not even just limited to
Mhm.
the workplace. But we see lots of Cobra effects related to DEI. For example,
Right.
when you have for example, discrimination trainings
Mhm.
or bias related trainings, many of these trainings
Mhm.
actually increase bias
Yes.
after the trainers leave. They actually increase discrimination, they reduce the rates of marginalized populations being hired, and they lower psychological safety for the people involved. Who'd have thought, right? Usually we think
Yeah.
if we train people to recognize bias, they'll become less biased. Not true.
Right.
Not true,
Not
right?
true. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think the existence of Cobra effects It doesn't mean that we need to sit here huddling in a corner, too scared to do anything,
Yeah.
but it
Right.
means that we need to be proactive. We need to think about the impacts of our work before we start doing it. We can't just throw things at the wall and to hope that something sticks. And the last 20 years of DEI have been throwing things at the wall, hoping things stick, and looking the other way when our initiatives have the opposite desired impact. In a lot of ways, and I'm not going to say always, but in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, the backlash we're facing today has been
Mhm.
something contributed to by the least effective of our initiatives, right? We're
Yeah.
responsible
Yeah.
for some, not all, of this
Yeah,
backlash. We have
that is
so much
true.
research on, for example, blame and shame, right? Like rhetoric that
Yep.
blames people and shames them for having
Right.
bias, directly associated with more discrimination, less empathy, more hostility. And yet we still see
Mhm.
practitioners even today engaging in those kinds of behaviors and then
That
acting
is true.
surprised when they get the behaviors that result from it. So there's
Right.
so many things we can do as an industry to hold ourselves accountable for our impact, and then also to advise the leaders we work with on how practices actually create outcomes, whether good or bad.
I like so much of what you just said there, and I noticed that a lot, when all of the training was happening. I didn't know about the Cobra Effect story, but I love that. I'm gonna use that going forward, so I'm gonna borrow that with pride, that story from you, because what I saw happen as well is exactly what you're saying, is that we saw an increase in bias, and we had the non-marginalized people, groups that suddenly felt like they were being victimized in the whole process. I watched it happening around as there was such a big push where suddenly they said they didn't feel psychologically safe at work. They could no longer have their opinion or disagree. Now they felt insecure about having those conversations. It was an interesting dynamic to watch happen around me, to see the number of people that suddenly were so upset and bothered by all of this and feeling like this was being forced on them. And I think you're absolutely right. It had the opposite effect of what the organizations were trying to do. And there was a much simpler, quieter way, honestly, that I think that could have all been handled by just some of the simple things that you were talking about in centralizing your HR practices for your hiring. I mean, something so simple like that. You don't have to make a big statement about certain things. You can go ahead and make those changes. Most people don't even realize those changes are going on.
That's true.
But when you force it on them, then they're very hyper aware of it. And suddenly something that wasn't a problem is now a problem to them.
And you can do both as well. Like, you don't just have to be quiet. You can give people very clear chances to participate in this work. But there's a
That's true.
night and day difference between pointing fingers and say, you
Yeah.
are the problem. You need to fix yourself versus saying,
Right.
this is the problem. You are the solution,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
You
Much
can
different
play a
framing.
role in making things better. I want your help. We need to do things
Yeah.
together, right? We need to change
Yep.
how things happen around here. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'd like you to do. This will make all of us stronger. This will make us feel more respected. This will strengthen our relationships. Will you help me? Completely
Yes.
different
Yeah.
from your fault, you're the problem, you're racist, you're sexist, so get
Mhm.
your act together or you're fired, right? What are they going to do?
Right.
They're going to eliminate me because I'm the threat now, right?
Yes, yes,
And
yeah, it's so
unfortunately, we
true.
see that happen in workplaces everywhere, right? People
Mhm.
who and by the way, none of the statements that I gave were wrong, right? Like
Right.
maybe I am speaking truth to power. Maybe I'm actually pointing at the
Yes.
racist, right? Um,
Yes, absolutely.
but I have to understand that that behavior, even though it might feel good in the moment, even when it
Mhm.
might feel righteous, isn't
Right.
going to drive the behavior that I want. In fact, it'll probably drive the opposite. They will turn around
That's
and
true.
lash out. They'll discriminate against someone else. And then if I'm a practitioner, arguably that's my fault, right? Arguably, I
Yes,
led them to do that, right? And
that's
and
true.
this is the tough part of this work is that we need to own our impact even if we as practitioners or as leaders, have our own good
Mhm.
intentions ourselves, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's
that's a
such
really
a
good
hard
point.
thing for us to reckon with that I think for better or worse, we're being forced to reckon with right now.
Are you ready to take your podcast to the next level? Let LJM Productions help you sound your best. We specialize in podcast editing, production, audio restoration, and mixing, ensuring every episode is polished, professional, and ready to wow your audience. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned podcaster, we'll handle the technical details so you can focus on sharing your voice. Partner with LJM Productions today and hear the difference.
Well, and I do think that many organizations do have leaders who do genuinely care about fairness. I don't think that it's always, and I think there are some organizations where that isn't true, but I would say many do have these leaders who are focused on that. So where do things start to break down, do you think?
Hmm. Well, I think the challenge is that okay, let's back up a bit. Um, the FAIR framework, which I talk about a lot in the
Yeah.
book,
Mhm.
describes four tenets that can
Okay.
take this work from ineffective and performative to effective and impactful. And those
Right.
tenets are outcomes, not
Okay.
intentions alone,
Okay.
systems, not self help,
Okay.
coalitions, not clicks,
Mhm.
and win win,
Yeah.
not zero sum, right?
Okay.
So the question you asked, which is where do things break down? I think this speaks a
Yeah.
lot to systems, not self help. Our workplaces
Okay.
tackle things like we're only just a collection of individuals. We say, look, if something bad happens, it's because there was one bad apple or two bad apples,
Mhm.
right? And when we
Yes.
try to fix things, we just say, well, how can individuals have individual tools and individual courage and individual
Mm.
practices? We never
Mhm.
look at the environment around us. And so,
That's
for
true.
example, let's bring it back to human resources, right? We
Yeah.
we focus a lot on HR leaders saying like, "Oh, you need to make sure you're not biased. You need to make sure you're making good
Right.
decisions." But we very rarely say, "Hey, how about all the processes that we steward? How about business as
Mhm.
usual? What are ways in which basic business assumptions might make all of us complicit in discrimination?" Right?
Yes,
Even if
yes,
we're good
yeah.
people. For example, let's say you just have a process where you really rely heavily on individual referrals and you never question it, and you use those referrals to fill out your candidate pool. Let's say your workplace is 90% male and 90% white, and they all make referrals. What's your candidate pool going to look like?
Oh,
90%
right,
male and
absolutely.
90% white, right? Now
Yes,
you can be a
yeah,
good person. You can go to all the trainings, but if you're
right.
not questioning this base assumption that stacks the deck from the start, you're part of the problem now, right?
That's a
So
good point,
so we're
yeah.
not examining our environment nearly as much as we're examining ourselves. And while I really appreciate all the introspection that often happens in this work, I can't believe I'm saying this. We could probably trade off, a solid 20%, 30% of the introspection for some more attention given to how we're designing these business as usual practices. If we change business as usual, if we create
Yeah.
fairer processes, if we
Mhm.
create, the sort of standardization and the centralization and the, process
Yeah.
that I've been talking about, we don't need to be perfectly pure. We don't have to be perfectly unbiased. We can just
Mhm.
steward a system that works. And that system will
Right.
continue to produce fair outcomes, even if we're imperfect people within it.
I like where you're going with this. It will be interesting to see how it works because I think about, the civil service system was put in place with the intention of creating a more fair environment in the federal government because at the time, all the things you were just talking about there as well. A lot of nepotism was happening, a lot of, definitely unfair and very favorable to whoever was in office or who had power. And so they created the civil service system. Now, I'm curious your thoughts about because clearly the civil service system was not perfect by any means. And we've seen clear breakdowns around that. But here was a system that was initially designed. I'm curious what your thoughts are around that because there is a lot of attack on the civil service system today and wanting to completely dismantle it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this isn't particularly controversial, but I think in
Yeah,
the federal government there have been lots and lots of these systems to promote fairness, to create good design, to shift incentives, right? You can look at the US military, you can look at the civil service. I mean, there are tons of these processes that have been set up. Um, and perhaps as a testament to their success, there's a reason all of these things are being actively dismantled. Right?
good point.
Why
Yes,
else would all of these things be tackled? Because the exact
right.
environment that you described,
Mhm.
nepotism, corruption,
Yes.
right, favoritism, the opposite of
Yeah. The
meritocracy, if
merit
you will,
system, yes,
right?
exactly, yes,
Um,
yeah.
I think that's because perhaps some people in positions of power want that right now.
That's a valid point.
If you
Yes,
look at the
absolutely.
qualifications of people in power, it's not exactly the qualifications of the usual folks we have come to expect from those roles.
That is true.
And so
Yes,
the
that is true.
dismantling of all of these safeguards, I think is a very naked play to say like, well, all these standards, all
Yeah.
these merit-based decisions, right? We don't like that.
Yeah,
We want to just
yeah.
promote our friends. We want to just give positions away to people who we know. Um,
Right.
and we're gonna use
That is
Darvo
true.
to attack anyone who accuses us of
That's
otherwise,
right.
right? Like, we're just going to
That's right.
to reverse, victim and offender and just say like, "Oh, if you're accusing us of unfairness, then you must be unfair. If you're accusing us of
Right.
favoritism, you must be committing favoritism."
Absolutely.
Anyways, I think these
Eh
are good processes, and it's a shame to see them dismantled. I hope to see them
yeah.
rebuilt as soon as possible.
I do too. I'm wondering too, Lily, how do you respond when the comment we're hearing a lot of this right now is that, well, I just want, we should hire based on who the best candidate is.
Are they
And
doing
I
that?
don't think anybody would argue that we all want that, but what's the reality of that? To your point, without the systems in place, the best candidate is who I choose in my hiring pool
That's
then,
right.
right? And what happens around that. So I'm kind of curious when you talk to organizations and help counsel them, what are some of the ways that you help address those types of mindsets, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I honestly approach them with an open mind and say, "Do you
Okay.
know that you're hiring the best candidates you could?" And the answer is
Mm-hmm.
no. So then we then ask, right? Like, why don't we look at your process to make sure that you're hiring the best candidates you could be? What is your process? Usually they don't know or they don't want to admit it. But once
Right.
we spell out their process, right? For example, I think like 2 or 3 years ago, I worked with a company where their actual process on the books was their very small hiring team would just send out a whole bunch of calls, right, to their friends and their network, and they'd hire based on that. Their managers had no idea. They were just like, oh, yeah, we're just going to hire the best from this pool.
Right.
Their pool was not the best, right?
Not the
Or
best.
something
Yeah.
closer to home. Lots of companies right now, because of the sheer volume of applications that they're getting, they're just
Mhm.
running them through automatic screeners, right?
That's
Or
true.
they're
Yep.
just saying screen for Ivy League only, cut out everyone else,
Yes,
right? Or a whole bunch
that's
of these
true.
other biases. So then we have to ask, is this getting the best? And if we actually, so on that example, like 2 or 3 years ago, also, I was reading this fascinating study that found that Ivy League candidates, on average, perform somewhere between 1 to 2% better on average. That's not, that's
Wow.
nothing. That's
That's not
that's
much. Yeah,
nothing,
yeah.
nothing,
No, mm-mm.
right? So
No.
basically, you're throwing out like 90% of your candidate pool for nothing
Right.
because
Yeah,
you like the
yeah.
idea of status and prestige, which doesn't always
Yes,
translate to
absolutely.
their ability to do the job. So, there's
That's
all
true.
these questions. How are we making our decisions? Is this
Mhm.
process we're using actually getting us the best of the best? The answer is always no. So once we
Right.
find that answer, which is usually no, we then have to ask,
Uh-huh.
what does it mean to get the best? What does it mean to
That's
find the
true.
top talent? What does like what are the skills we actually want from our workforce and how do we select
Mm-hmm.
for these things? And answering
Right.
those questions is how any company can become more fair, more inclusive, and also just actually get top talent. I think the people that use the rhetoric of like, oh, we just want to hire the most qualified. They're saying something that sounds great, but what they're actually doing is they're dismissing any potential critique of their business as usual. What they're really saying is, I don't want to have to think too hard about how I've always done it.
Yeah, I
And
think that's very true.
that's what we need to challenge.
We definitely need to challenge that. Well, and I was thinking about when you were talking about the Cobra Effect is you could apply that to your point in so many different areas. And it is kind of interesting when you start to peel that back a little bit. I was thinking around the challenges with, from immigration to ARPA funds to lots of different things that happen around us are exactly what you just said is that when you don't take the time on the front end to build proper systems and processes in place, that Cobra effect is going to come into play every single time.
Mhm.
And yes, people are going to game the system. They're going to figure out how to work around it. Maybe the system will be broken. And then going backwards is really hard to do that because now you've created this environment. So I really like what you're talking about here because everything is focused in on making really good decisions and that systemic problem, which is what we all talk about. But it seems to me like we also act like these are insurmountable challenges that we're never going to be able to fix. And I'm assuming you don't subscribe to that belief.
No, no, not at all, because we have so much knowledge about how
Yeah.
it is the environment works, but I think so often we let ourselves run off into the woods with
Mhm.
our ideological debates and talking over words and talking over abstractions when I think the facts, right? The actual data, the actual reality of the world. I mean, like these are things we can and should discuss. And when we do discuss them with an open mind, with genuine good intentions, with a willingness to
Mhm.
learn and to accept that we might not have all the facts ourselves, I still do believe that people can cross the aisle and work together and create solutions that are actually better for everyone that allow
Yeah.
everyone to win. And I think this,
Yeah.
particularly remember my last tenet, right? Win-win, not zero sum. I
Yes.
think zero
Yes.
sum has infected so much of our discourse right now.
I
There's just this
agree.
idea floating in the air that if you win, then I must lose. And so the only
Yes.
way for me to win is for you to lose. And so I'm going to fight you and I'm going to do everything I can to put you down so that I don't lose. And I see this from everywhere. I see this, not only in our political sphere, but also in day-to-day
Mhm.
conversations, even among advocates for fairness and inclusion, right? Like I see so much of this talk
Yes.
around the enemy. We have to win. We have to
Right.
claim more for ourselves. They can't win. And I just I don't see a positive resolution to this, right? Like I think we
Yeah.
really do need to create a vision that is better than this every person for themselves fighting for scraps while the world crumbles around us. Like this is no way
Right.
to live and it's no way to
No.
work, right? So
No.
I think we have to believe in better. We have to have that belief. We have to follow through. We have to build connections, and we have to relentlessly hammer in this idea that we can all win. We just have to make smarter decisions based on actual data that actually solve real problems and create real value for real people. Like
Yes.
that. Like
Yes.
that's it. And I know it's easier said than done, but I do think it's simple.
Right.
I do think it's simple.
Yeah. Hey everyone, we're the Her Resources podcast, where women share real stories, real lessons, and the resources that help them succeed. We're always looking for inspiring women, business leaders, creatives, educators, and changemakers who want to share their journey and empower others. If that sounds like you, we'd love to hear your story. Reach out to us at contact@herresourcespodcast.com and let's start the conversation. Well, and when I'm listening to you talk, it gets me very excited, and I agree with you. It all sounds, it sounds so simple, and I subscribe to everything that you're talking about there. I believe this for a really long time. I do think that we can make, but it is so hard, and I
Yeah.
think it's so hard because of unconscious bias as well. We were talking about that this weekend, my husband and a friend of ours, about the things that we don't even realize because we were either raised that way or it was maybe the state we grew up in or the culture we grew up in, that there are things that we're not even realizing or that we're bringing this bias forward. I mean, we might think we're not racist. We might think that we're not discriminatory, but a lot of that is inherent in us, and we don't even recognize it. And I wonder, does that factor into some of this as well, and why it's harder to make that transition to what the things that you were just saying?
So I have a bit of a convoluted, perhaps spicy take on unconscious
Yeah,
bias.
I
One,
can't wait to hear it.
I think we all have it. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Two, I don't care. It doesn't matter, right? Because here's an example, right? Like people in this space like to say a lot that racism isn't the shark, it's the water. And so
Okay.
we talk about bias like each of us has this like little, I don't know, culprit inside of us that's like making
Uh-huh.
terrible decisions. Sure,
Right.
I guess so. But then if you're biased, then I'm biased, then our neighbors are biased and
Yeah,
our parents are biased. Yes,
very true.
this is
Yep.
correct. We are all biased. Okay, now what? Now what?
Mhm.
What are we going to
Yeah.
do about it? And it turns out biased people can make unbiased decisions, right?
Right, right.
So
Yes,
let's
yeah.
stop talking about how biased we are. Let's stop admiring the problem. I don't care how biased we are. I get it. We're all
I like that
biased.
take. Yeah.
Let's start doing something about it. I'm sure
Right.
I have, I don't know, dozens of unexamined biases. I'm sure
Oh,
you
for
do
sure.
too. So do you
I
want to
do. I
spend
no
2
doubt.
hours kind of, going to confessionary and talking about all of our
No.
biases? I don't
No, I
care.
don't. Yes,
Let's make
exactly.
better decisions for the people right now in our lives, right? So, can we make sure that when we talk to a new person, we ask questions like, tell me more about that, or why do you think that, right? So that even if I
Right.
have biases about them, I'm actively
Mhm.
asking for information that challenges my biases, whatever they are, right? I don't wanna sit
Yeah.
here and go like, "Oh, I'm gonna talk to a new person. Time to be anxious for 24 hours about all the biases I
Right.
could have about them." Like, how unproductive.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
I'm slightly exasperated, not because I disagree with your assertion that we all
Right.
have bias, but I find that sometimes we get obsessed with this individual,
Very true.
self-reflection, individual purity. I couldn't
Yeah.
care less. How are we showing up in our behaviors and our
Right.
decisions every single day and trying to challenge and bust bias in our decision making, even if
Mhm.
it's something as boring as standardizing our decision-making process, right? Um,
Right.
so
Right.
that it doesn't matter if I'm biased. I'm still making a good, unbiased decision. And all of us,
Right.
especially folks in HR, I think we can aspire a little more to that, right? Stop
Very
stop
true.
trying to assess yourself with bias and start trying to make better decisions regardless. I think we can do that today.
That is a really good call out, and I'm glad that I asked that. I'm glad that that's the way that you answered it as well, is that exactly what you just said is we have these, it doesn't then preclude us from being a good person and making good
Mhm.
decisions regardless of how we were raised or what environment we were put in. We see it happen all the time, right? People make good decisions, they treat people the right way regardless of the environment that they were raised in or that they
Exactly.
grew up in. Yeah,
And we
yeah,
can
that's a
aspire to
really good
that,
call.
right? Like, in the same way
Yeah.
that good people can make terrible decisions if their environment pushes
Yes.
them to it,
Very
let's flip
true,
that.
very true.
Let's make
Yeah.
an environment so airtight and so fair that you can put the worst possible person in that environment and they'll be forced to make a good decision regardless. And that's called
Yes, yeah.
organizational design, right?
Yep,
Like
yep,
that's
that is true.
why don't we aspire to that, right? Make a workplace where you can put
Yes.
horrible people in it and still have great outcomes.
And still have a great outcome. I like that. Well, so then do you think, we are seeing obviously so much backlash against the whole DEI and B. Some organizations put B, and even SHRM took a huge hit on
Yeah.
their stance. They did not do themselves any favors with some of the things that they came
No,
out
they
and
did
said.
not.
No, they didn't. Um, do you think that that pushback is a signal that organizations approach the work in the wrong way then? That maybe kind of what we were talking about is that it became a little too much of that performative approach and not enough of let's look at the systems, let's look at the organizational design and make better decisions?
So I think the pushback on the acronym and the language, um,
Mhm.
I don't think it relates much to organizations' behavior at all. Remember what I said
Okay.
earlier, right? Like
Yeah.
we virtue signaled and then we turned that virtue signaling into
Yes.
a sacrificial lamb.
Yep.
Either way, it was without substance. So
It was.
I
It's
think
true.
the real question here is now that we're getting all the pushback, are organizations able to double down on their substantial, impactful work?
Mm,
Or are we just
right.
watching it all evaporate because there was never anything substantial to begin with? I think that's the
That's a
real
really good
question.
point.
So
Yeah.
if we if we take out all the performative stuff, if we take away the trainings, if we take away the language, is anything left? And if your workplace says, no, there's nothing left, maybe you'll have to face the reality that there was nothing there to begin with. But many
Yeah.
workplaces, I'm thrilled to say, have lots left. They say, like, yeah, of course, like we do tons
Yeah.
of development for our leaders. We do tons of assessment of our workforce. We make sure our decisions are fair. We make sure that our teams are inclusive and respectful. We train our managers to be good leaders. We make sure that when we build things for our customers, they're designed with many different needs in mind. What's that
Right.
work called? 5 years ago, we would have said DEI. Okay, fine.
Yes.
I don't care
Yeah.
what you call it. If you're doing the work, good on you. So let's keep doing that,
Yeah.
right? And
That's a
like
good
that's
point.
what we need to be focusing on today.
I think that's a really good point for sure, Lily. Now, you talked about the 4 tenets for fixing fairness. Which of those tenets do organizations struggle with the most?
Systems. Systems, not self-help,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
outcomes, not intentions. So you focus on that tenet by building good
Mhm.
measurement, by building good accountability. Coalitions,
Okay.
not clicks. You focus on that tenet by building strong connections, right? Good
Mhm.
conversation across groups. Win-win,
Right.
not zero sum. That's a communications
Okay.
tenet. That's how you
Yeah.
talk about the work. That's how you frame the work. Systems, not
Okay.
self-help. This one's the one that workplaces struggle with, right? I talked a bit about it
Yeah.
before. We are not very good as humans at looking around us. We focus too much on
We do.
individuals, right? So instead
Yes.
of saying, what are decisions you and I can make, Linda, that
Mhm.
create more fairness around us? We're inclined to say, what are things you can reflect on as an individual, Linda, to become more fair? Oftentimes,
Right.
we overlook the door right next to us to say,
Yes.
like, how
Yeah.
many times do you need to bash your head on the wall before you'll break through? That's the wrong question.
Right.
It's the wrong
Yes.
question. There are other tools we can
Absolutely.
use to create better behavior. And that's the one that I think workplaces get stuck.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think you're absolutely right. That's kind of what we started to see, right? It was the focus on the individuals and not on the systems and the organizations when all of that was, when organizations were embracing DEI and B, and it did become about focusing on people and not focusing on systems.
Right.
So that is such a great call out. What are some practical steps that HR leaders can take to start implementing these ideas today?
Measure the impact of your systems.
Okay.
Measure the impact of your programs. Ask, what would it
Yeah.
look like for this program to succeed? Pull out
Yep.
one outcome. Maybe you get reduced discrimination. Maybe you get
Okay.
higher promotion rates. Maybe you get more engagement. Maybe you get more psychological safety. You name it. Lots of
Mhm.
different ways to assess what matters. Then do a pre and
Yeah.
post test. Every time you deploy something, do a pre test, collect some data, deploy it, do a post test, collect some data, ask if it changed, right? That's one thing. For systems,
Yeah.
start asking around. Ask your workers, what is
Okay.
one broken thing in this workplace that everybody takes for granted. So in the
I
book,
like
I
that.
call that a missing stair. So
Okay.
there are workplaces where a system is broken, a leader is toxic, a process
Mhm.
doesn't work. And instead of fixing it, we all just tell each other how to jump over the missing stair. We teach each other how to
Right.
avoid the problem instead of actually fixing it.
Yes.
So ask
Yep.
people, where are the missing stairs? What is something broken that everyone is scared to point at? That's another thing. One,
I
or
like that.
third, create more connections between people, create more space for dialogue, especially across
Okay.
groups. So right now we're having a
Yes.
lot of hiding and withdrawing and
Mhm.
shrinking.
Yep.
Instead, resist that urge. Say, how do we create
Okay.
more contact across differences, between departments, between employee resource groups, between
Mm.
different levels of leadership? We need that cross cultural and cross border contact
Right.
because that's what builds actual connections, actual relationships. That's what builds coalitions. And then finally, how do
Yeah.
you frame this work in terms of the win-win? Write down reasons why every initiative you're doing will make the workplace better for everybody. Something very
That
basic.
is really
And then
good.
communicate that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the key too, right? Is you have to have a good communication plan around all of these things.
Yep.
So, yeah. Now, I really like that. If there's one mindset shift that leaders should make about fairness, what do you think that should be?
Win-win. It's gotta be
Win-win.
win-win, right?
Okay.
So, I think
Yeah.
leaders right now, some of them, especially the ones that are anxious about the political climate, they
Mhm.
see fairness or DEI as
Yeah.
partisan. They say like, well, this was a partisan trend. This was about uplifting certain groups, but not others. We can't do
Mhm.
that, right? Um, so in their head, it was like you have, I don't know, white supremacy on one side and then
Yeah.
DEI on the other side. So they're like, "Oh,
Right.
we don't wanna pick favorites. We're gonna do
Yes.
nothing." That's
Right.
that's how a lot of leaders are thinking about it. Completely wrong, completely misguided.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
work, whatever we call it, is about everyone winning. Everyone,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yep.
including the people who are having the best time. Sometimes in my own
Yes.
work,
Yeah.
I talk to the leader in the room who is the most senior, the most
Mhm.
successful, usually a white dude. And I'll talk to
Right?
this guy and I'll say, I actually want to build a workplace that's better for you than it is today. Can you believe that? And that leader says, I actually can't believe that. And I say, I'm going to build that. So tell me about
Yeah.
what's wrong with the workplace, even
Right.
for you, even for the person who's having the best time. Because I think that
Yeah.
approach is truly necessary to fight against the zero sum idea that the only way we can make things better for women or people of color or disabled people or
Mhm.
queer and trans people is by somehow making things worse for white men. That's not
That
true. That's never been true.
is
So we need to say that
true.
out loud.
Right. No, that's a really good point, and I think that I'm glad you said that out loud as well because I do think that, that is something where we saw it happen. We saw that that was the backlash in a lot of those conversations was
Yeah.
how much worse we were making it for white men. I mean, because
Yeah.
that's really what it was about. It wasn't any other groups that were talking about that. It was white men. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, it is
And we
interesting.
can make things
No.
better for white men too, like
Yes, we can.
maybe
You're
not only
right.
them,
Yeah.
but like definitely
No.
also them.
Yeah, they could be a part of it, right?
Absolutely.
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 No, that is great. I have, kind of a strange question for you, as we're coming to an end of our amazing conversation. What role do you think AI plays in all of this? Because I'm actually watching an interesting, trend towards the discriminatory practices towards AI, and that seems really
Uh,
silly, right, to say that, but you kind of are seeing it, and what's interesting to me is it's almost showing a mirror to us because of the amount of backlash and fear and resistance that we're seeing towards AI. What are your thoughts on that?
well, you don't suppose we have another hour to talk, do you?
I'm gonna
Because
have you back for sure, Lily,
that's an
because you have been
entire
amazing.
podcast episode. It's an entire I
Yeah,
say,
that's
pointing
fair.
at Karen Hell's Empire of AI right behind me on my bookshelf. Okay. Um,
Yep.
so the very, very short answer that I can give now that I'm
Yeah.
happy to expound on in a longer conversation is
Yeah.
AI is a multiplier. AI
Okay.
takes whatever you have at present and it multiplies that. If you've got some really, really good stuff, if you've got really good systems, really good people, really good incentives,
Yeah.
AI will make a huge positive difference.
Okay.
If you have not good people, not good systems, not good incentives, AI will double that or triple that and make your problem much bigger. Most people
Okay.
have no awareness of what their workplace is like, and they're dropping AI in like a bomb.
Yes, they are.
In many
Yeah.
cases, it is causing more harm than good, I would say. Not because there's,
Yeah.
fundamentally the technology is good or evil, right?
Right.
Ultimately, it's a technology,
Just
right?
another
Like
tool, right? Yep.
it
Exactly.
gives you words. Sometimes the words
Right.
help, sometimes they don't. But I
That's
think
true.
oftentimes we're stuck in this conversation of, oh, is AI good? Is AI bad?
Mhm.
One, that's a long debate we could have, but two, I'm more interested in what are people using it for and what is the
Yeah,
impact of its usage in the workplace. From what I'm seeing, it doesn't seem to be creating the positive benefits we want it to.
I agree.
Not
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
tech is evil, but
Yeah,
because
because of the tool,
humans,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
People who are using
Yes.
the tech in
Yes.
their heavily skewed, maybe unfair environments with skewed incentives
Mhm.
are able to create much more harm at scale much faster. You can look at the
That is
prevalence
so
of work
true.
slop. You can look at the
Yes.
decline in quality. You can look at the huge amount of spam on all social media sites. You can look
Yes,
at
yeah.
the additional challenges we're having verifying, work quality. We can look at security concerns.
Right. The
Those things
list
all
goes on.
existed before. AI is just
Right.
10x multiplying them, right? Now,
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
positive side, there are some positive things as well, right? Like, for example,
Mhm.
I personally have friends who are senior leaders or senior ICs, and they're able to create some incredible things with the use of
Oh,
AI.
sure.
So, like,
Yeah.
sure, it's not all bad, but when we deploy it without thinking in our workplaces, we get all the good stuff times 10 and all the
Mm.
bad stuff times 10. And if we don't
Yeah.
know our spread of the good stuff and the bad stuff,
Right?
we might get a lot of gold or we might get a lot of shit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's kind of what we're seeing.
I that's a great, I love that. That is a really great way to quickly sum up a very complex conversation for sure. Lily, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights on such an important topic. And what I appreciate about this conversation is that it does challenge us to move beyond the good intentions
Mhm.
conversation and really think about how our organizations operate because it's true that fairness doesn't happen by accident, and it does require thoughtful leadership, strong systems, as you've proven out today, and a willingness to look honestly at how decisions are actually made. And for our listeners today, if this conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to check out Lily Zheng's book, Fixing Fairness. It offers practical framework for leaders who want to move beyond performative efforts and toward real progress in their organizations. And Lily, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, you can find me on my website at lilyzhang.co. Maybe we can link that in the
We will.
notes.
We'll put all of this in
Uh,
the show notes. You
there's
bet.
also, I'm very happy to report, a new free tool that folks can use to basically evaluate your own workplace on the four tenets of the FAIR framework for free.
Oh,
So
wow.
you can find that
Awesome.
also on the website and check that out for yourself and maybe support the book if you find the ideas
Yeah.
compelling.
Absolutely. I love this. And as always, thank you to all of our listeners to the Her Resources podcast, where, we hope we're bringing together these thoughtful voices like Lily and meaningful conversations about leadership, human resources, and the future of work. And if you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did, be sure to subscribe, share it with a colleague, and continue the conversation with us. So until next time, continue leading with purpose. And Lily, thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. This was tons of fun.
You've been listening to the Her Resources podcast, where women's voices, leadership, and growth take center stage. As your host, I'm here to remind you that the journey isn't always easy, but it is always worth it. Every step you take to build confidence, create impact, or use your voice is part of a much bigger story. It's the one that inspires others to do the same. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love it if you subscribed, left a review, or shared it with another woman who's ready to step into her power. And as always, thank you for being a part of this community. Together, we're not just changing conversations, we're changing the future.